The Maple Leafs draw first blood in the Battle of Ontario, winning game number 1. Hey everyone, welcome into Off the Post. Rob Wong, joined alongside by Toronto Sun sports columnist Steve Simmons and Postmedia hockey columnist Bruce Garrioch. And guys, the Battle of Ontario, we've been waiting 21 years for this, and game 1 did not disappoint in some ways. Maybe it was disappointing in other ways if you're an Ottawa Senators fan waking up this morning as the Maple Leafs win it 6-2. Bruce, of course, it's been a long wait for Sens fans, 8 seasons to get back to this point where they are in the postseason. A lot of the conversation so far has been about the lack of playoff experience for this team. How much of a factor do you think played in the first game?
Well, I think it was a huge factor in the first 10 minutes because I think the Senators, when they got into that environment, weren't sure what to expect. And then, they only have 250 games of NHL experience, guys, and they sat one of the players with 63 games in experience in Nick Cousins. And I think Nick Cousins in the Battle of Ontario should be a factor, not a healthy scratch. I think sometimes you have to look at situations, and that's a situation where Nick Cousins should absolutely be in the lineup. I know I'm going to hear ad nauseum how the Senators got screwed by the referees. They didn't get screwed by the referees, they screwed themselves. And you can't put yourselves in that position to take those penalties, whether you think they're calls or not. Their penalty killing at the best of times has struggled on the road. Sure, if you want to put this down to inexperience, go ahead. Here's what happened, guys. Simple as this. And Steve Simmons is ready to crown the Leafs, I know, right now, because he's already outlined the path to the Stanley Cup final. But I will say this. Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, John Tavares, Anthony Stolarz. Last night, the Leafs' best players were their best players. Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, Drake Batherson, on and on. Those players, and Linus Ullmark, who we're going to talk about later, were not their best players. And that, to me, Steve, was the difference in the game.
I had a great conversation between periods with one of the Ottawa upper-ups in management. And he said, you can talk about playoffs, you can instruct about playoffs, they can listen to Daniel Alfredsson and all the war stories of the past, but until you get in the game and realize that the intensity's gone up, that the speed has gone up, that the crowd has changed, that everything is different, until you experience it, you don't know what it's like. And that's what happened to the Ottawa Senators in many ways last night, is they were not a composed team prepared to play that kind of hockey on an individual basis. How did they battle? How did they fight for loose pucks? How did they do the things that separate you in games? And as far as I'm concerned, they showed their lack of experience. They showed their lack of composure. And you combine that with pretty close to terrible goaltending. And, you're not going to win a lot of playoffs doing that kind of thing. And it was interesting. Bruce mentioned how the great players on the Leafs were great. He talked about Matthews and Marner and Nylander, etc. And he mentioned Stolarz. Well, around the NHL, Stolarz is not considered to be a great goalie. And if you look at the history of the Leafs in the playoffs, they've always had the second best goalie in almost every series they're in. They face Vasilevsky and they face Bobrovsky and they face Swayman. They might have the best goalie in this series. And he's had 2 great years in a row with great numbers. And maybe this is Anthony Stolarz's time to say, here, I'm arrived, I'm here. But I'll tell you one thing, if the Senators don't play a smarter game in games 2, 3, and 4, you can say goodbye to them real fast.
Well, we've talked a lot in the lead up to this series, even with the both of you guys, about this Maple Leafs team and how they might look a little bit different under Craig Berube, Steve. And I think, one thing I noticed in at least the opener was that historically, whether it's guys like William Nylander, even Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews to a certain extent, maybe, from time to time, they've kind of shied away from engaging in some of these post-scrum whistles or the physicality of a series. But at least for one game, we saw William Nylander throwing some jabs. We saw Mitch Marner using the body to separate players from the puck. And of course, Austin Matthews was pretty physical as well. Did it feel and look like a different Maple Leaf team, at least for one game?
Yes and no. I'm going to say yes in the way they dominated the scoreboard and dominated with power play goals and dominated that way. And you talk about the players engaging. It started with Nick Robertson on the first shift or second shift of the game when he goes into the corner at 100 miles an hour and he belts somebody. And then he goes another, almost a pinball goes off him and he belts somebody else. This is a guy who's never been known for being a physical player really in any way. And he's basically saying to his teammates, look at me, I'm doing this, which means you have to do it. And one of the keys for the Leafs last night was their fourth line. Scott Laughton centering Yarncroc and Lorentz. That line dominated the Senators' fourth line and scored a goal, and maybe should have had a second one. One was on the goal line that the Ottawa defenseman took it off the goal line. But they really did that fourth line playoff thing that the Leafs haven't had from fourth lines in the past. So maybe that's another thing to look at with this team and think that, you know, they have more weapons in different ways than they've had before.
You know, I saw a tweet from someone trying to be extremely positive in this market saying, you know, that Kachuk, Stützle, and Giroux outshot attempted Toronto 18-3 at 5-on-5. Okay, sure. Like, come on.
I think
Is this
Kachuk had the breakaway, and Kachuk had one other, what I thought was a pretty good wrist shot that I thought hurt Stolarz in the shoulder. I'll be honest with you, I don't remember even seeing Stützle or Giroux. Like they were semi-invisible.
But here's where I'm going with this is Stutz had 9 hits. Okay. They don't need Tim Stützle to have 9 hits, guys. Brady Tkachuk, I think, had 7 hits and 7 shots or something. I don't even know. And if he'd scored on the breakaway, we'd be talking about him differently than we are right now. But I guess my point is Tim Stützle needs to score 9 goals in the playoffs. He doesn't need to have 9 hits. You know, it to me, if that happened, the Senators were off their game.
My old friend Dallas Aikens used to say that the hit statistic is among the dumbest ones in hockey because it means you don't have the puck.
Yeah, like
guys, because you don't have the puck.
That's where I'm going. Like they need Tim Stützle creating opportunities. The shot attempts, I don't know. I mean, to me, you're trying to grasp at a positive, but all I've heard from Ottawa today is how they were just excellent 5-on-5. Well, okay, sure.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear you.
You know, sorry, Rob.
No, I was going to say it's interesting to hear you say that because, as Steve and I would know from previous playoffs, there was always talks about, Matthews, Marner, these guys, they're out shooting their opponents when they're on the ice. Well, I think people would trade actual goals for those shot attempts, and last night that's what happened. They got outshot when they were on the ice, but they scored when they needed it.
Here's what happens, Bruce, so often now, and frankly, after being in this business and covering hockey now for 40 plus years, and you're not far behind me in that, Bruce. Guys who don't understand the game and guys who can't see the game can only break it down statistically. And they'll throw anything at you after the game that, we did this well or we did that well. Well, sometimes what you think you did well and what the actual truth is not the same thing. And so you can have all your, as I once said to Scotty Bowman, not a lot of attempted shots have scored. Some of them have, but a whole bunch of them we never saw again. So shot attempts to me is one of those stats that, I just shake my head at. But people who don't know the game, who can't watch a game and tell you, well, that's what happened here. They have to look it up after the game to actually find out what happened. And I hear that all the time, and it frankly drives me a little bit crazy because it's created an entire generation of journalists who cover the game and don't know the game.
Well, and the other thing, Roy McGregor, who he still writes the odd time for the Globe and Mail. Steve told me once when Jacques Martin used to tell us that they outchanced the team, he said outchancing a team to me is like foul balls. Well, we hit 15 foul balls. So it's they may have gotten a no hitter, but we had 15 foul balls. I mean, come on.
Yep, I have the same thought.
All right. Lastly, Linus Ullmark. We talked about Anthony Stolarz a little bit already. It was not a great game one for him, Bruce, and
Yeah.
the story is starting to build about at least his playoff statistics not being as good as his regular season statistics. I think Ottawa Senators fans felt coming into these playoffs pretty good about his play heading into the postseason. Again, it is just one game. We always see how things change heading into game number 2. But were there any concerning signs about his play and his Senators playoff debut?
Well, one thing I've learned about Linus Ullmark in the short amount of time I've covered him is he's not the kind of guy you can count out. He tends to bounce back. I know he had a 750 save percentage on Sunday night, and let in 6 goals and 24 shots. He was quite honest in his assessment afterwards. He said he didn't think he was great. He used the word all right at first, but then he later on said, "Look, I'm disappointed in my performance." Um, so they look. I One thing I've learned about Allmark is, we had a good chat with him last week. There's no bigger critic of Linus Ullmark than Linus Ullmark himself, and he's not going to make excuses for what happened last night, but he also has to be better. I mean, you're right. Like if he's got an 877 save percentage in 11 playoff games, Steve, that doesn't improve, then then the Senators are in big time trouble here.
Well, I think game 2 really is so important for Ullmark. If he comes out and he's not good again, then the Senators are going to almost look like they're done. I mean, you can't lose 2 in a row and have lousy goaltending in 2 consecutive games and think you've got a chance to win the series with the guy that you're counting on to be great. What I didn't like last night with Ullmark was they beat him on the first goal was a low wrist shot, stick side, that he probably should have stopped. I'll give him all the benefit of the doubt on the Marner breakaway. That was a superb offensive play that Marner made. But I just thought they scored high glove, they scored low glove, they scored low stick side. Like it wasn't like there was only one thing they were picking on.
He became leaky for sure.
Yeah, and to me, you have a choice not a choice, but to be successful in the playoffs, you have to do one of 2 things. You either have to shut the other team down, or you have to make the saves when they really matter. And I got to watch Grant Fuhr with those Edmonton Oilers teams, and he was the greatest. In a 5-5 game or a 6-5 game, he was the greatest goalie you ever saw. After he let in 5, he just couldn't score the 6th one. And I think that's what they're going to need from Ullmark. If it's 3-2 or 4-1 or whatever, no more after that. You shut down. It's not a 5-1 and now a 6-2. Like you shut down. And so I think for the first time possibly, and I said this a little bit earlier, for the first time possibly it's 9 playoff series in 8 years, and this will be the 10th. And I can honestly go through every year and tell you that the Leafs had the second best goalie in every single series. And this may be the first one where they have the best one.
And another thing, just before we go, Rob, that has to stop is I think they made it 4-2, and what was it, 45 seconds later, the Leafs made it 5-2. There's been a penchant for that this year. That has to stop as well.
Absolutely. A back-breaking goal there in the opener. But we'll see what happens in game number 2. Leafs lead the series 1-0. Game 2 goes on Tuesday night, 7:30, over at Scotiabank Arena. As always, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. For Bruce Garrioch and Steve Simmons, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.